Ilan.
No idea. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be together with you. We're learning this week's Parsha, Parshat Yitro. I'm still the rabbinic intern, David Helfand, for another couple of months, joined by my esteemed friends and teachers who are going to be learning together with us all together. And we're going to jump into learning one verse. We're going to spend an hour on one verse, and we're going to see how it goes from this week's Parsha. But before we do that, as always, if anybody would like to dedicate their learning to anybody or anything or whatever's on your mind, we'll take dedications at this time. If anybody has, you're welcome to put into the chat or to say aloud, and then we'll say the blessing for learning Torah, and then we will jump in to the Torah itself. So anybody have anybody that they like to learn for or in honor of or memory of today? I'm going to dedicate my learning today in honor and gratitude for law enforcement and for the members of the Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. And thank God everybody is safe and well. And may we all only know good things from here on out. And so also all those who are on the front lines fighting this crazy pandemic, we send them a lot of love, a lot of support, and a lot of stability as they need it as they continue fighting through this crazy world and pandemic that we're battling through. Marilyn, good to see you. Matt, good to see you as well. If you have dedications, you're welcome to share them in the chat or aloud. Otherwise, we'll jump into our blessing for learning Torah together. So we'll say, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, God, King of the universe, who's given us this commandment to fulfill and going swimming in the sea of Torah and immersing ourselves in that sea of Torah. So today we are going to look at one verse, as I mentioned, from this week's Parsha, Parshat Yitro. On the heels of last week's Parsha with the actual splitting of the Red Sea and the crossing over and spending time learning about what happens at the end of that story with the Battle of Amalek and the team effort between Joshua, Aaron, Moses, and Hur to lift Moses up to keep his hands up in the air, and what the different stories behind that was. Today we're going to look at what happens with the 10 commandments in Revelation. But in particular, we're not going to actually look at any of the commandments themselves. We are going to look at a particular verse that sets a scene that really is quite challenging. It's challenging because it's telling us that the Jewish people saw something in particular. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's not a great intro, but I'll work on that one. But here we go. Let's look together. We're looking at chapter 20, verse 15. Ziggy, why don't you read for us the Hebrew, and Marilyn, if you wouldn't mind, read for us the English. And this is the verse that we're going to draw our attention to for our conversation together today. So Ziggy, verse 15, chapter 20, verse 15 in Hebrew.
וכל העם רואים את הקולות ואת הלפידים ואת כל השופר ואת ההר עשן וירא העם וינועו ויעמדו מרחוק.
Beautiful. And Maryland?
And all the people saw the voices and the torches, the sound of the shofar and the smoking mountain, and the people saw and trembled, so they stood from afar.
Okay. So the scene is as follows. We are about to receive the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, the Revelation, the most important piece of our Torah, our foundation of as a people. And the scene is set that the people, what? What's the image that's being described here?
They're just seeing.
They're seeing what, though?
The voices, the torches, the sound.
So they're seeing the voices.
They're not hearing them.
Ro'im et hakolot. They're seeing the voices. Now, how does one see a voice? Exactly, Maryland, exactly. And that's the question that we're going to address with the help of some commentaries to help us understand what was really seen. It's a really weird image. Ro'im et hakolot, seeing these voices, right? I can see torches, right? And I can hear the sounds of the shofar. I can hear the sounds of the shofar, but I can't see the sound. I can see the physical shofar. And I can see the smoky mountain, and people were trembling, and they took a step backwards. This is the pyrotechnics scene that you think about when you read this story, right? Fireworks and loud noises and crazy chaos in a way in preparation for receiving the Torah. So we're going to look at a couple of, Marilyn, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but they're just seeing it. They're not hearing anything.
Well,
they're seeing the sound. They're seeing the smoking mountain.
Well, so the question that we're going to ask is, how do you see sound? Right? How do you see voices? And what are these voices that you're seeing? Right? If I were to ask you, Marilyn, what are the voices that you're hearing at this scene? You would probably say,
oh, at that scene?
Yeah, at this scene, what are the voices you're hearing?
Each between all the people, the sound of the shofar, and whatever else. I mean,
right?
God, so, I don't know.
God, you're probably schmoozing with your neighbor, asking them about their day, and what are we standing here waiting for, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a really unique word and choice of words and phrase in particular to say, what is ro'im et hakolot? That's really what we're going to discuss today. And this has sent the rabbis down a very long, crazy path to figure out, how do you see voices? Okay. So we're going to look at a couple of modern commentaries. We're going to look at Everett Fox. We're going to look at the old JPS, which is from 1917, the new JPS Tanakh from 1985, Robert Alter, and then the Art Scroll Stone Chumash to see how they all translate this verse. Now, it's important when we look at Torah that we understand that there is no one set translation and that everybody has their own unique translation that works for them. Some translate literally, some translate metaphorically or through images. Some translate through really what we call medactic grammar, like really thorough, exact grammar. And some people just give us context. And I think it's really important that when we look at translations, we keep that in mind, because we can learn other things through different ways of reading a text in different translations. And it's up to us as the reader to decide what translation works for us. Okay? So Bob, will you read for us Everett Fox, the modern day biblical commentator and scholar and translator of the Bible? Fox says, you're on mute, Bob. Hello, Neil. Good to see you.
I knew that. Now, all of the people were seeing the thunder sounds, the flashing torches, the shofar sound, and the mountain smoking. When the people saw, they faltered and stood far off. Okay.
So Everett Fox goes with thunder sounds as ro'im et hakolot, which, by the way, that's a pretty cool sound. Thunder sound. So we see thunder sounds, flashing torches, shofar sounding. So that's how he translates it. Why don't you read for us the old JPS Tanakh as well?
And all the people perceived the thunderings and the lightnings and the voice of the horn and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off.
So here, the old JPS, again, 1917, before my time, perceived the thundering. So they don't say anything about voices. They just focus in on the thunder, right? On the noise that thunder makes. Okay. Neil, would you be willing to read for us the new JPS 1985?
Yeah, sure.
It's the third one.
All the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance.
Okay, so, 60 plus years later, the people witnessed thunder and lightning. And it's interesting if you compare the two versions of the JPS Tanakh, it's interesting what they kept the same and then what they changed. It's very interesting. And finally, the last two. Neil, why don't you read Robert Alter, who, again, his magnum opus that he just put together is a 3-volume translation of the entire Tanakh in this beautiful literary way. So, Neil, read for us Robert Alter.
And all the people were seeing the thunder and the flashes and the sound of the ram's horn and the mountain in smoke. And the people saw, and they drew back and stood at a distance.
Okay, so here we see Alter takes a play out of Fox, similar in his translation, that the people were seeing thunder. And finally, the Stone Chumash, which is the Art Scroll translation, the entire people saw the thunder and the flames, the sound of the shofar, and the smoking mountain. The people saw and trembled and stood afar. Which translation do you like the best? Which translation really gives you the feeling of what's going on, Bob?
I think I prefer the old JPS.
Okay. Why?
When I see thunder and lightning, there's a little bit of trembling in my soul.
Trembling in what way? Like, and then also, is that trembling similar or different to the trembling that was probably happening at Mount Sinai?
I think the trembling is a little bit of fear.
Okay.
A little bit of don't quite know how to phrase this, but a little bit of awe that at the sight of such a phenomenon.
Okay.
And I suspect that's not too much different from what the people at Sinai were experiencing.
Yeah. There are a few moments in the Bible where I really just wanted to be there to kind of see what was going on.
Yeah.
This is one of those moments for sure. I would have loved to see the Garden of Eden and what that looked like, and not the Inagata Devita song that Iron Butterfly sings, from back in the day. But there are a few sights and sounds and scenes from the Torah that are just really hard to place yourself in because there's nothing comparable to it. So Marilyn, you were like raising your hand a little bit. Were you going to say something? You're on mute.
Yeah, I like a combination of the old JPS and the new JPS.
Okay, so put it together for us. Put the translation together so we know what you're.
Well, I like the idea of the people either perceiving and witnessing.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it like an individual. All the people perceive the thunderings and all the people witness the thundering and lightning. It made it an individual experience,
mm-hmm.
and each person took whatever meaning for him or herself. It's deeper than seeing, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Then the old JPS has the voice of the horn, and the new JPS has the blare of the horn.
Mm-hmm.
The voice is softer, and the blare is like, it's really like, it could be a negative, it could be a positive.
Oh.
It's a harsher.
I love that insight. That's really lovely. I agree with you. I really like the new JPS for the last piece that they fell back.
Right.
You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, the root of Vayanu is like to be shaken. Like we shake the lulav and etrog, right? I believe it's the same root. And there's something that's like, whoa, like I had to step back. I had to kind of be caught by the people around me because of this whole situation. Ziggy or Neil or Matt or whoever is representing the Sandowski family, if you want to chime in also, you're welcome to. Ziggy or Neil, go ahead, and then Ziggy.
Well, the only thing is, I just noticed he's using the word lapidim, which is torches, but then lightning is barak. And so the question is, was the word barak used in those days, or
So
lightning sounds like a sharper thing than the thunder.
So Neil, Neil, that's a great pickup on the wording, and we're actually going to see a comment about that in just 1 second. So hold off on the use of the word choice that they used, but that's a good point. So hold on to that for 1 second, okay? And Ziggy, what? Yeah, sorry, Neil, finish, please.
I'm finished.
Oh, you're finished? Okay. Neil, Ziggy, go ahead.
I don't see that any of these translations really are tracking the Hebrew per se, but that's not as important as the fact that none of it really tries to address the hearing of the sound, really.
Okay.
Which so basically they're repeating that part of it is translated, but there's no effort made to explain what does it really mean to hear sound.
Okay. Totally fair. So let's move a little forward. We're going to see Robert Alter, who gives us a little bit of background. And Neil, this is where he's going to play to your comment. He says, logically, of course, the objects of seeing would be only the lightning and the smoking mountain. But the writer presents Sinai's epiphany as one of tremendous synesthetic experience that overwhelms the people, while the temporal force of the particular scene or the 10 words are enunciated. Just as kolot, the sounds or the voices, is not the usual word for thunder, Neil, that's you. Lapidim, flashes, is not the usual designation for lightning, but rather it's a term that generally means torch. Here conveying the visual immediacy of the lightning flashes. Now, in layman's terms, because Alter speaks in a very high academic level, he acknowledges that the word choice is off. But he's also saying that what's happening is more than just seeing or listening, right? It's a full body experience. And that when you see something, it's actually bringing up other experience for you. And he uses this word synesthetic. Are you all familiar with the term synesthesia? So synesthesia, I didn't know about this until a few years ago. I actually had a Bible teacher in rabbinical school, I think during my second year, Dr. Tamar Marvin, who, when we were learning Bible, we were talking about, this scene, and she explained to us what synesthesia was. She explained it to us as she would hear something and would process as something different. Like she would see a letter and it would represent a color, which is why you say, can you hear the colors? It's the picture. Okay. And so technically, according to psychology, synesthesia is a neurological condition in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway, for example, hearing, it leads to an automatic or involuntary experience in second sensory or cognitive pathways, such as vision. So simply put, when one sense is activated, another unrelated sense is also activated at the same time. So if we go simply by this understanding that synesthesia kicks in two different activities and senses at the same time, then you really could see the sounds. But the concept of synesthesia did not come around until many, many years and generations after Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. So while people might have experienced seeing a sound or hearing a sight, we didn't get that modern concept until much, much later. So what the rabbis are going to do for us right now is they're going to help us understand what happened with ro'im et hakolot, with seeing the sounds or the voices, whichever translation you want to go with. And we're going to look at that through a very different lens. So Neil, to your original point that you made, you're correct. The voices, the Hebrew terms, barak, which is normally this thunder, right? Lightning, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the same term. And the torches, lapidim, is this lightning. right? Barak is thunder, lightning. Anyways, so we're going to go through and we're going to see together. And I originally got this idea of this source material. Last year, my brother was applying for a new job. He's a rabbi now. He was in the Bay Area for 10 years, and now he's in Maryland. And when he was preparing for his interviews for the community, he and I were working together, and we built this sheet, and I never ended up teaching it. So I get to teach it today. So I'm excited to be able to share Torah that I learned and got to use with my brother here with you all this afternoon. Okay, so what are these sounds? Well, let's go to Rashi, medieval commentator, France. Rashi says, Ro'im et hakolot, they saw the sounds, they saw that which should be heard. And he's quoting a Midrash, which we're going to look at that Midrash in 1 second. So Rashi says that seeing the sounds means that they saw the things that they should be hearing. Okay. Something which is impossible to see on any other occasion. So according to Rashi, it's impossible to actually see something, to hear something that you see. But clearly, one of the miracles of Ma'amad Har Sinai, of standing at the base of Mount Sinai, is the fact that you could hear things which you saw, and vice versa. Okay, this kind of synesthetic motion. So let's look at the original Midrash that he quotes from. Marilyn, I see a hand.
No,
Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on when you see something that you can, about hearing it, you can also feel it. Sometimes,
sure.
And it's sometimes oxytocin kicks in and causes a feeling, like when you see a baby or a pet, and you get this really warm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That's where sight can translate to other sensations.
Yeah. Right. Poo, 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 an earthquake happens. You feel that.
Yeah.
Right. And poo, 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 a tornado happens. You can see it. You can feel it too, by the way. That's where I grew up, in Tornado Alley. So you could feel those things.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're right in that regard for sure. So let's see what the original Midrash has to say. So the Mercil to the Rabbi Ishmael is a 2nd century Midrashic compilation on the book of Exodus. And it's part Agadah, part story, and then part Halacha. And so actually next week's portion of Mishpatim is really when it transitions into the legal pieces of the text. Prior to that, with the stories of last week's Parsha and this Parsha, it's more Agadah, it's more story-like. But it's a great compilation of text. I got to learn it in Israel. It was a lot of fun. So the Mercil to the Rabbi Ishmael says the following on this idea of, and the people saw the voices. It says the voice of voices and the flame of flames. So first of all, what does that mean? Who is the voice of voices and the flame of flames? I see some like puzzle looks. What do we think? Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
Well, the voice of voices, the flame of flames. I mean, the be all and all encompassing, kind of implies God.
Okay, perhaps it's God. Okay, Marilyn, is that what you were going to go with also? Okay. Anybody else have another thought as what the voice of voices or the flame of flames could be? You're probably correct. It's probably a good assumption to make. So now the Midrash is going to tell us and ask us, how many voices and flames were there? It says, rather, they would speak to a person according to their ability. As it says, the voice of God is power. And you might recognize this verse, Kol Adonai Bakoach, from Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat. When we stand, we sing Mizmor LeDavid, or whatever it is. One of the eyes is Kol Adonai Bakoach. And so this Midrash helps us understand that when they heard the sounds and they saw everything happening, that they did it and they took it in. Each person took it in according to the way in which they processed things. Right? And so this is a really beautiful way of saying that every person processes things differently. Right? Bob, your experience in Mount Sinai was very different than Marilyn's experience in Mount Sinai, which is very different from Ziggy's and very different from Neil's and very different from Matt's or from everybody. because we each are able to process things in a very unique way. And that's still true to this day. We all process grief or trauma differently. We all process joy and success differently. And so I'm curious, what do you think about this idea that the Midrash is bringing to us, that we each can process things in our own way? Marilyn's like, I support that. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier when
Okay. Other thoughts on, do we like this? Do we agree? Ziggy is my resident cynic to an extent. What do you think? Can you buy this?
Yeah, I do actually.
Woo!
To prove you wrong.
Okay, great.
No, I think, it depends. Like, for instance, when you have a Yom HaShoah event, okay, and people can relate to something that's being told, and say, I mean, everybody really feels the event, and then makes you react in very different ways than, let's say, going to a comedy concert. And the same thing here. This event is a very powerful event, and I'm sure that it had very, very different effect on different people based on their belief and their faith and that kind of stuff. So absolutely, it would affect people differently.
Great. Marilyn.
Doesn't free will have a lot to do with this too? You're able, people have free will. And
go ahead, finish that.
No, I was going to say, with free will, you can interpret whatever you want.
Exactly. Right. And it's an interesting thing that you bring up, free will. Did the Jewish people had a lot of say in what was going on right now? Did they get to choose that they wanted to?
But they could choose the interpretation.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that you bring up the concept of free will, especially at Mount Sinai. I'm going to take my screen down for 1 second, because there's a really famous Midrash that says that when the Jewish people were standing at the base of Mount Sinai to receive the Torah and Revelation, that it was actually as if there was a mountain that was uprooted and flipped upside down on top of their heads and kind of coerced them into being there. And so if you read that text with this idea of free will, there's no free will in being coerced into being there, but there's free will in how we interpret an experience, or, which is where what I love about conservative Judaism in particular, is that there is a freedom to read a text and read a law in a living way. And we're going to see that towards the end of our study together, and what I mean by that. Okay, so let's move a little forward. The Midrash continues to say, and all the people saw the sounds and the lightning, that they saw what was visible and they heard what was audible. And these are the words of what Rabbi Ishmael says. Rabbi Akiva, his sparring partner for the day, says that they saw what was audible and they heard what was visible. So they each take it their own direction, right? And if you play off the very earlier Midrash, is that every person can interpret it and experience however it is that they do. So one more short Midrash. This is from Midrash Rabba, which is a 12th century or so Midrashic compilation on the portions by book. And the text says, all the people saw the thunders. It's not written thunder, singular, but rather thunders, plural, hakol versus hakolot. Rabbi Yochanan teaches that when God's voice came forth from Mount Sinai, it divided itself into 70 human languages so that the whole world might understand it and every nation heard it in their own language. So not only is it everybody can interpret it for themselves in the experience, but it was also translated to make sure that it was universal. Such a lovely idea that everybody was accounted for. All the different nations or all the different languages or all the different people could really be present and experience what was going on at Mount Sinai. It was an inclusionary moment more than anything. And I think that's a really lovely image. So now that we've focused on the kolot, these voices, I want to just move forward to what it's like to see and hear together. Okay. There's way more text than we have for time, so I'll send this to anybody who would like to see it. So comes the Safat Emet, who is the Alter Rebbe from Poland, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter, who lived during the 19th and early 20th century. And I know that you've studied a lot of him with Rabbi Cameras this year, so you know a little bit of how he works. And he's going to comment on this verse again, V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. Lior, would you mind reading for us in English, the Sfat Emet? No? You're in pass? Okay. Who would like to read? Neil, you're already unmuted. Would you read for us?
All right. All the people saw the voices. The voice was that which said, I am the Lord your God. Each one of Israel saw the root of his or her own life's force. With their very eyes, each one saw the part of the divine soul above that lives within. They had no need to believe the commandments because they saw the voices. That's the way it is when God speaks.
So what is the Safat Emet trying to tell us? Neil, what's your takeaway here? What do you think he's trying to say? And then Marilyn.
Okay, I wasn't listening to what I was reading. No, let me see.
At least you're honest.
With each one saw. Let Marilyn go first, and I'll talk after her.
You got it, Marilyn.
I was just going to
Owning
say
a friend.
each person has that Pintele Yid in them.
Great. So each person has that individual piece of them that makes them unique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Neil. Now I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, the people saw what was going on, and the commandments became theirs, I guess.
I love that. That's really nice that it became theirs.
Yes. There's one other thing I might comment on. I think when they gave the 10 Commandments, was it Yethro got it? Was Jethro there? Am I getting mixed up?
Well, this week's parsha is Yitro.
Yethro.
And
Yethro wasn't Jewish at that time, right?
He's not Jewish, correct? He's a Midianite priest or chieftain. It's also Moses' father-in-law.
And they gave him he got the 10 Commandments.
That happens. There's a Midrash that says that he got his own set later on.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. That's not the Torah, though.
That's not the Torah. Okay.
But Yitro is really important, not because of the 10 Commandments and Revelation, but because it said to Moses, you're going to get burnt out really quickly of being the leader and being the chief judge and being the police officer and being the chief bottle washer and the plumber and everything else. So you better create for yourself systems and judges and courts so that you don't have to be the only person who does everything.
Okay.
So that was the role that Yitro played. Okay. So comes Rabbi Art Green, who is an expert in the Sfat Emet, and he says that the dramatic setting of the Sinai revelation is so powerful that we sometimes forget to ask the internal question about what this event of God's self-revealing meant to those who were present. And we too, he says, are among them. So what was it going on for them? What did it feel like? What were they thinking? So here we're told that the supernatural seeing the voices means that each one uniquely experienced the divine voice speaking with his or her own soul. To this, all the rest of religion, indeed, perhaps all the rest of life, is merely commentary. What do we think about that? Yes, no? Bob, I see a head shake.
Yeah, I think this comes closest so far to saying to me that this is a uniquely personal event. And when you experience an event like that, it's tangible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Marilyn.
It's the connection. The connection is what grabs the person. They're hooked. And so once they're hooked and really connected with the divine, they're there. And that was the most important thing. I mean, it's kind of weird because all the rest of life that is, they say commentary, it's the commentary that, I don't know if the word is, it prescribes the way life is, in the Jewish religion, the way life is supposed to be led. So
it also guides us.
Yeah.
Right. It's the roadmap in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
It's the blueprints for what we're doing.
But
So,
there's emphasis on the connection, the being ignited, your soul ignited.
So my question now is that for Art Green, he says that it's so powerful that we forget about the question about what this event, God's self-revealing, meant to those who were present. But if we're told that seeing the voice means that each one of us experienced this divine speaking of the soul, and we heard it in our own way and in our own language, my question for you all is, do you feel like you've ever had this divine moment where you've heard what you needed to hear to be able to guide you? Whether that's the Torah and whatever your own self-revelation might have been, have you had those moments? I realize I'm asking a personal and intimate question, but it's something to think about. What are the revelatory moments in your lives? Sure, Leora, please.
Hi, everybody. For me, it's not a matter of personal details. It's a matter of getting a lot of my advice and knowledge through my dreams. They guide me, and especially on a very stressful time. I get people in my life that are still in, the spirit. And they're really guiding me of things, to think of how to act, how to do. So, yeah.
Anybody
That's
else?
where I am.
Oh, thank you, Leora. So you don't have, yeah, Ziggy, go ahead, please.
On a different note, to digress a bit, because I don't have anything in that regard to contribute to. But the Art Green is saying what a special event it is and how it is supposed to last forever, and then no longer than a day or a minute or later, you got the golden calf. So apparently it was not all that. It obviously was a very, very meaningful event and very something to remember. But yet, how quickly did they forget?
Yeah. Ziggy, I'll turn it a different approach to say that when you're riding in cloud 9 and you're as high as you can get because something amazing has happened, eventually something's going to come that you're going to crash and burn, right? Which is why it's important to remember the teaching of Rabbi Simcha Bunam of Pietza is that you have 2 pockets and 2 coins, right? For my sake, the world was created and I am but dust and ashes. And so you're right. If you're flying high because you just experienced revelation and you not only experienced it physically, but emotionally, mentally, intellectually in your own way, you're going to forget about the realities of life in a way. And that maybe is what led the Jewish people to the golden calf. Again, the timeline of the story is a little bit off. Right? We get the 10 commandments and then we actually don't get the golden calf until a few parshiot from now, which the timeline again is a little off because if that should have happened right afterwards in theory, et cetera, et cetera. And so you wonder about how long the after party was for revelation, right? How long did they continue partying for? Because Ziggy, you probably could argue that they continued partying up until the golden calf. And perhaps that was the culmination of the party. I don't know.
Not if the event itself was as transforming. That should not have happened. If it was as transforming as we're trying to say it was.
The should have game is a tough one to play, though.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of we should not have done X or whatnot in the Torah and in our own personal lives.
But when Art Green says this should last for a lifetime and for generations, clearly that's not enough. Clearly, for the human mind and psyche, that was not enough. It's just, what have you done for me 5 minutes ago? Yeah. Forget a year ago. So,
and I think the other thing that Rabbi Green is pointing to is the fact that we still continue year in and year out to remember Revelation in a few ways. Number one is we read Parshat Yitro each and every year. But number two is we have the holiday of Shavuot, where we stay up all night to learn Torah in preparation for receiving the 10 Commandments, again, that first day of Shavuot, and to have that revelatory experience and to be able to share that with people. And so I think that's significant. I think it might be a stretch to say that the rest of religion is the commentary. Everything else is, the experience and the lessons and the values and whatnot. That's maybe a stretch for a lot of people. But I think that there's a lot of truth in revelatory moments as a whole. And I think that we should think about what those moments are in our lives that are revelatory. Bob, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Yeah. As we're talking, I was thinking, what was the revelatory moment for me? And it was the birth of each of my grandchildren.
Oh, interesting. You say grandchildren. Okay. Say more.
Yeah. And then the first time I changed a diaper was my golden calf moment for each of them. And it was cyclical for all four of them. And I kind of have a better appreciation for what the Hebrews were going through at Sinai.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah, Marilyn, please.
See if
you're good.
With revelatory moments, I mean, it would lead somebody to the thought that it's perfection, and then it's going to stay that way. But everyday life is not that way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a matter of putting it in perspective and trying to hold on to it where it's feasible. And that's why we probably have to be reminded all the time that, that about the revelations.
Yeah. Because revelation happens all the time.
Yeah.
And we just don't call it revelation. We call it life. We call it learning. We call it evolution of our own selves. But I think the revelatory moments happen often. So the Sfat Emet is going to continue, and then we're going to end with one final modern day Midrash. The Sfat Emet continues and says that we still have to understand, though, what is the need for this miracle? What purpose is it? What do I care if I just heard the sounds without a miracle? And we may answer, because seeing and hearing are two distinct experiences, one unlike the other. And each one has an advantage and a disadvantage, he says. For the seer, looks at the thing in its completeness, exactly as it is. But for the hearer, the sound changes as it enters the ears, and it isn't exactly the same sound that was originally made. So that's the advantage of seeing. But with hearing, there's an advantage that the sound truly enters inside of the person through the ear, whereas the sight remains only on the outside. And with this in mind, the verse teaches us that the children of Israel had both advantages, the seeing and the hearing. They received the words in the manner of seeing sounds, such that though they truly entered inside of them, nevertheless they saw the sounds without any distortion. It was this perfect symphony of movements where you felt it and you heard it and you processed it, and it was pure and complete and whole without any sort of distortion or static or whatever. I call this a whole body experience where all of your senses are working perfectly, clearly and purely to be able to create this beautiful experience. And they say that Revelation was unlike anything else. All the commentaries, all the scholars, but unlike anything else, it's hard to imagine because I wasn't there. And I didn't get it for my own self. So what I want to end with is a midrash that actually is a modern day midrash. There was I'll take my screen down one last time. There was a compilation, 2-volume compilation of midrashim that was written in Hebrew. And one of the volumes, I believe, is in the works to be translated into English, of women's midrashim. It's called Deershuni, which is a famous line that is often used amongst the rabbis in commenting on different verses from the Torah. Deershuni literally means that I need to be explained. Expound me, right? Unroll and unravel all of the things so that I can understand what's going on. And so we're going to look at a midrash written by Rabbi Orna Prince that was originally written in Hebrew that we translated. And it's from the volume Deershuni, Israeli Women Writing Midrash. And before we read the midrash, I want to share a phrase with you all. You might be familiar with the phrases when we talk about God as omnipresent, omnipotent, right? All-knowing, all-powerful, et cetera, et cetera. There's a phrase amongst biblical theorists and scholars that, in particular, that of Professor James Kugel, who's a very famous Bible theorist and scholar, called omnisignificant. And omnisignificant more or less means that when you read the Torah, you're looking for phrases or words that are superfluous or words that have multiple meanings or that offer a different potential for unfolding that which the Torah says. Another way of saying this is that the Torah itself is still a living book and that we can still pull things from it to make it relevant today's time, which is one of the things I mentioned earlier about this idea within the conservative movement is that we still make Jewish law living and we adapt things when necessary and within limits. So the midrash that I'm going to bring with you all here is really playing on omni-significance vis-a-vis revelation. And it's going to open with 2 verses from the opening chapters of the book of Exodus when we're learning about the Hebrew midwives and the decree that Pharaoh makes to get rid of the baby boys. Okay? Here we go. Okay. So the verse says, "And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at their birth stools. If it's a boy, kill the boy. If it's a girl, let her live. But the midwives, having the awe of God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them, and they let the children live. If it wasn't for these women, baby Moses would not be who we call Moses Rabbeinu, right? Moses, our teacher, our leader." Bob, will you read for us the opening sections of the Midrash, please?
Midwives were asked, "Where did your awe of God come from?" They responded, "From the great and deep visions that we saw on the birth stool, from the mysteries that surround us morning and evening. A person and another person come into the world. Where does he come from and what does he bring with him? The good that is his mother sees in him, the good that his mother sees in him, the compassion and the love that he awakes. Babies come out of sore bodies, and the gentle imprint of the finger of God is stamped upon their faces."
Okay, so stop right there. Everybody understand what's going on? The midwives were asked a question. And again, this is not a midrash that has been canonized for hundreds of years. This is a midrash that was written in the past 10 years. Okay? Which says to each of us that we can all write our own midrashim. Okay, and I think that's a really important thing, but that's a different conversation. So he wants to know, where did they get their awe from? Where did they get their reverence from? Where did they get this dedication from? And they say they got it from the birth stools. Okay, then they're questioned. Bob, go ahead.
But at Mount Sinai, it says, "And all the people see the sounds and the sights and the lights, and the sound of the shofar and the mountain smoking. And the people awed and moved and stood far away. And Moshe said to the people, do not awe, for in order to test you, God came, and in order that his awe will be on your faces, so you shall not sin. Awe of God comes from a place of thunder and lightning.
Okay. So they were asked the question, like, based on what happened at Mount Sinai, we were told not to have awe, and that awe comes from a place of thunder and lightning, of revelation. Awe comes from there. And so what do they respond?
There is awe that comes from external sight, and there is awe that comes from internal sight. It happens that upon seeing a miracle that is above nature, a person is filled with fear, and the awe grows in him. But with us, it is not so. Our awe is not in heavens. It is specifically from nature and from the pain of the sight on the birthing stool. The awe of God was born in us, and we learnt to choose the good and preserve life and fight death and oppose evil.
So let's take a step back. What's going on in the Midrash? What's being told to us? And how does it relate ultimately to the story that we were reading? You can read it now here in full so that you can have a better idea. When you finished rereading it, because it looks like you're all rereading it, what's the point of this Midrash?
Is it Revelation is reborn? I mean, with each generation?
Okay, so perhaps revelation is something that happens multiple times.
With each birth, you know.
Not just with each birth, but each person has
Yeah.
revelation, which, Bob, you hinted towards that about a revelatory moment at the birth of each of your grandchildren, right? And I'm sure if anybody else who's a parent or a grandparent or has siblings that they watched come to life, that's a revelatory moment for sure. What else is the Midrash saying to you? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
To me, it's saying that the revelatory moment is natural.
Okay.
But we have to embrace it for it to have any kind of meaning to us. I think so often we fight these revelatory moments.
Meaning that we don't want to accept that they're happening?
I don't know that it's a conscious rejection. It's hard, I think, to look at the everyday thing and think of it in terms of being a revelatory moment.
Mm-hmm.
The sunrise has happened every single day for billions of years. There's a miracle there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the fact that it has happened for billions of years itself is a miracle. The fact that it happened once.
But do you name it?
We call it sunrise. So yeah.
But do you, in those moments that happen, I'm going to take my screen down so I can see you all for a moment. In those moments where it happens daily, do you actually name the revelatory moments? Our liturgy names it, but it's hard for each of us, I think, to actually say, wow, unless you see this magnificent sunrise and sunset, right? You probably are not going to just be like naming that. And I think that's a challenge. And I think what you're bringing here actually plays nicely to what the original question is. Where did your awe of God come from? How did you get to be so inspired or fearful or obedient or whatever word you want to use that you put your life in jeopardy to save these baby boys. And I think that that's really hard to acknowledge, that we can have moments of deep awe and inspiration and excitement, and also moments of fear. But the hard part is perhaps actually just naming the moments as a whole. And I think that part of what this Midrash is trying to say to us is at the very end, where it says there is all that comes from external, and then there's all that comes from internal. Our life is a lot external and a lot internal, sometimes more than one or the other. And we have to be in control of that. And I think part of being in control of it is also pushing us to hear the sights and see the sounds and really put our full presence and body and everything into these revelatory moments. Yeah, Marilyn and then Neil.
When you wake up in the morning and you say Modeh Ani,
Mm-hmm.
that's in a way a revelation. I mean, you woke up and you're still alive. I mean, and
Yeah,
you that's a moment that can be named.
but when it comes to, you're 100% correct, but when it comes to tefillah, we oftentimes do things because they're rote movements,
Mm-hmm.
right? I say Modeh Ani, I say all these things, and that's the keva piece, that's the fixed piece and the set piece of liturgy and of tefillah.
Mm-hmm.
But to really have that kavanah behind saying Modeh Ani, and I'll give you a really great example. Sunday morning, when I put on my talis and tefillin and I davened, I said the two brachot, Matir Asurim and Zokef Kefufim, who free the bound and who raise up the downtrodden. And I stopped and I said them word for word with deep intention, because I really felt it that morning, given what had happened the night before in Texas. So otherwise, my intention is not as high and not as intense as it would normally be. But in that moment, I really felt
Mm-hmm.
the connection there. And it's really hard to find deep kavanah and to really feel like you had this moment of revelation where you heard and you saw the things that you felt and you witnessed. Right? And then go ahead, Neil.
I don't know if this, I just internalizing for revelation, it plays a lot on your imagination often. And that's just one thing. And the fact that something's revealed doesn't mean it's permanent.
Yeah.
Just a couple things.
Yeah, we have that phrase in Hebrew a lot, galui v'yadua, that things that are revealed and then they're known. There's a lot of things that are revealed, but I don't necessarily know them.
Right.
And that's part of the challenge in life, is to recognize and be aware of the things that are around you or that are revealed. Any final thoughts? So my hope and my blessing is for each of us as we stand before the Torah to be receiving it again this Shabbat with the reading of the Ten Commandments, is that we can see and feel the things that are happening in our lives and just be a little bit more aware of those things and naming them. But more importantly, that we're able to understand them for our own needs and not for some prescribed religious need or communal need or worldly need, but for what we need them for, each of us individually. And I hope that together we can see a little bit more, and we can hear a little bit more and learn a little bit more. So that's what I got. I hope to see some of you in Shul on Shabbat morning, 9:30 in person. You can follow on the live stream tomorrow night, 6 o'clock with Cantor Raffi, joining in the interfaith service with our partners over at Temple Aliyah and a couple of the other multi-faith communities around town.
6 o'clock or 8?
Tomorrow night, I think it's 6 o'clock, no?
I thought I read 8 somewhere.
Sure. I don't know.
I think I recall that as well.
That it's 8?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to double check just to make sure that I'm not telling the rest of the world incorrectly. Hold on. I'm pulling the email up now.
It's with Temple Aliyah.
8 p.m. You are correct. 8 p.m. My apologies, unless that's a typo, but it says 8 p.m. So follow what it says on the website. This is why you're all a lot better in the show world than I am right now. Anyways, I appreciate all of you as always. It's great to be with you.